The late afternoon sun had begun to dip beneath the skyline of Los Angeles, painting the city with streaks of gold and amber. The glass walls of Aurelia, a high-end fine dining restaurant nestled on one of the busiest boulevards, glowed in that warm light, promising an evening of elegance to those who entered. The valet, dressed in pressed uniforms, whisked away expensive cars, gleaming Bentleys, roaring Ferraris, and the quiet hum of a Tesla or two. Inside, the air was perfumed with the faint aroma of rosemary, truffle oil, and freshly polished mahogany tables. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in soft brilliance, illuminating the chatter of wealthy patrons, Hollywood executives, socialites, and celebrities seeking privacy in corner booths. To dine at Aurelia wasn't just about food, it was a statement of status. At exactly that moment, a man in his mid-50s stepped through the revolving glass doors. His presence was quiet, almost invisible at first. He wore a worn black blazer, faded jeans, and scuffed boots that looked like they had seen far too many miles. His long dark hair framed a face marked not by extravagance but by humility. His eyes, calm, deep, and observant, took in the room without judgment. To most, he looked like any other passerby who might have wandered into the wrong place. This man was Keanu Reeves. But to the staff at Aurelia, who hadn't recognized him yet, he was nobody. The hostess glanced up from her podium, her practiced smile faltering when she saw his clothes. She hesitated, then decided not to approach. Instead, she busied herself with rearranging menus, pretending not to notice him. Keanu waited patiently, not bothered by the dismissal. He stepped forward slowly, his boots making soft thuds against the marble floor, and approached the front desk. Before he could say a word, a tall, sharp-featured waiter with slicked-back hair intercepted him. His name tag read Damien. His eyes scanned Keanu from head to toe, lingering on the boots, the jeans, then the blazer that looked more thrift store than designer. Damien's lips curled into a smirk, the kind of smile that wasn't warm but cutting, a blade hidden behind politeness. "Sir," Damien said, blocking his path to the hostess podium. "This establishment has a strict reservation policy." Keanu inclined his head slightly, his voice calm, gentle, with that familiar low timbre. "I understand. I'd just like a table, if one's available." Damien chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't think you understand. This isn't the kind of place you can just walk into. We cater to a very specific clientele." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Specific clientele. The kind that wore Armani suits, diamond watches, and polished shoes. The kind Keanu, dressed in his humble attire, clearly did not resemble. Keanu's eyes flickered for a moment, but his expression remained neutral. "That's fine. A glass of water will do, if nothing else." The waiter's smirk hardened into something colder. He leaned in, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "Look, pal, I'll be straight with you. We don't serve your kind here." The words hit like a hammer, not to Keanu, but to the air around them. A couple at the bar glanced over, sensing the tension. The hostess stiffened, unsure if she should intervene. But Damien stood firm, confident in his judgment. To him, Keanu was just another drifter who had wandered in, someone who didn't belong in a world built on glamour and money. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. Instead, he simply offered the faintest of smiles, sad, almost weary. His reply came soft, yet clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Everyone deserves a seat at the table." The line wasn't just about dinner. It was layered, a truth Damien couldn't grasp. But rather than reflect, Damien scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Sir, please, don't make this difficult. There are plenty of other places more suited for you." He gestured vaguely toward the street outside, where food trucks and diners lined the boulevard. The kind of places Damien assumed were a better fit for a man like Keanu. Keanu's gaze drifted past Damien for a moment, sweeping the restaurant. He watched as waiters poured vintage wine into crystal glasses for executives bragging about box office numbers. He saw a young couple celebrating an anniversary, the woman's eyes sparkling under candlelight. He noticed a busboy, barely 20, working with quiet dedication, stacking plates, ignored by all but the kitchen staff. Finally, Keanu returned his eyes to Damien. "I won't trouble you. I'll just sit quietly in the corner. One glass of water." Nothing more. Damien's jaw tightened. He hated the way this man, this stranger, remained calm, unshaken by insult. He hated the ease in Keanu's voice, the humility that clashed with the superiority Damien clung to. With exaggerated slowness, Damien stepped aside, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Fine. 1 glass of water. In the corner. Don't expect anything else." Keanu nodded once, not offended, not triumphant, just accepting. He walked toward an empty table near the back, where shadows softened the chandelier's glow. He slid into the seat, placing his hands loosely on the table, and simply sat there. Damien muttered under his breath as he walked away. Unbelievable. The busboy, the same young man Keanu had noticed earlier, hesitated near the corner, curiosity in his eyes. There was something familiar about the guest's face, something that nagged at the edge of recognition. But before he could piece it together, Damien snapped his fingers, barking an order to clear dishes from another table. As Keanu waited quietly, the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and murmured conversations filled the air. To the rest of the room, he was just a man sitting alone, out of place in a world of wealth. To Damien, he was an intruder. But to Aurelia itself, to the bricks and beams of the building, he was something more. Because the truth Damien didn't know yet was this: Keanu Reeves wasn't just a guest. He was the owner. And with every insult, with every dismissive glance, the waiter was writing his own downfall. The minutes that followed were thick with an uneasy rhythm. Keanu sat alone in the dimly lit corner, his silhouette softened by the amber glow of the chandelier above. The room seemed to buzz around him, glasses clinking, laughter rippling through the air, forks delicately scraping porcelain, but at his table there was silence. Damien returned with a glass of water, placing it down with unnecessary force, the crystal ringing as it touched the polished surface. "There," he said curtly, before walking away without another glance. The hostility wasn't subtle. It was the kind of disdain meant to be noticed, meant to remind Keanu that his presence here was unwelcome. Across the room, a group of wait staff huddled near the service station. Damien leaned in, his voice sharp with amusement. "Can you believe this guy? Walks in here looking like he just rolled out of a thrift store and asks for a table. Probably doesn't even have enough for a tip." Laughter broke out among 2 younger servers, though their chuckles carried hesitation. One of them stole a glance back at Keanu, as if sensing something was off. The manager, a portly man with salt and pepper hair named Mr. Harlow, overheard Damien's mocking and gave only a half-interested sigh. "As long as he pays for what he takes, I don't care," Harlow muttered, straightening his tie. He had grown accustomed to Aurelia's clientele being of a certain caliber, and to him, this quiet stranger sitting alone in the corner didn't fit the mold. It wasn't worth the hassle of correcting Damien. Status had become the unspoken currency in this establishment, and humility often found itself unwelcome. So Harlow allowed it to continue. Keanu, meanwhile, took a slow sip of the water, his movements deliberate, steady, almost meditative. His eyes scanned the room, but not with judgment. He noticed everything: the way the young busboy was hurriedly carrying a tray too heavy for him, the way an elderly woman was left waiting too long for her wine refill, the way Damien and the others laughed while pretending not to watch him. He noticed because noticing was what Keanu did best. But the cruelty didn't stop at whispers. As minutes stretched on, Damien made sure to amplify the message of exclusion. When a nearby couple an evening were ordered a bottle of champagne, Damien walked past Keanu's table with the unopened bottle, deliberately holding it high, his voice booming theatrically. "Ah, only the finest for our distinguished guests." The words carried, sharp and mocking, a not-so-subtle jab at the man in the corner with nothing but a glass of water. The couple chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they should find humor in the display. A few other patrons glanced toward Keanu, some curious, some dismissive. Keanu did not react. His face remained calm, his posture relaxed, though the weight of the humiliation pressed heavier with each passing second. The busboy, now stacking silverware at a nearby table, clenched his jaw in frustration. He had seen rude customers before, but rarely staff behaving this way. Still, he kept silent, bound by hierarchy, knowing that speaking up might cost him his job. Then came the moment that shifted the energy of the entire room. Damien returned once more, this time approaching Keanu directly with feigned politeness. "Sir," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, I'm afraid we're running short on seating tonight. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere less formal. He gestured toward the door, the implication crystal clear. Leave. The hum of the restaurant quieted. Conversations stalled. Forks hovered in midair as people realized they were watching something unfold, something unscripted. The tension crackled in the air like static. Keanu met Damien's gaze, his expression still composed, though his silence spoke volumes. He did not rise, did not argue. Instead, he simply said, "I'll wait for the manager." The words caught Damien off guard, and for a moment, his smug confidence faltered. But he quickly recovered, sneering as he stepped back. "The manager. Suit yourself." He turned sharply, striding toward the service station where Harlow stood watching. The manager sighed heavily, clearly irritated that the matter had escalated. He straightened his blazer and prepared to confront the man in the corner, still unaware that he wasn't dealing with a troublesome guest, but with the very owner of Aurelia. Across the restaurant, eyes followed Keanu's every movement, whispers spreading like wildfire. Who was this man? Why was he being treated this way? And why did he remain so calm, as though he knew something the rest of them didn't? The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Damien marched toward the service station, his posture stiff with false bravado. He leaned over to whisper in the manager's ear, his words dripping with disdain. "The guy's being difficult, Harlow. Wants to see you. Says he'll just sit there all night with his glass of water. No order, no reservation. He's wasting a table." Mr. Harlow pinched the bridge of his nose, sighing heavily. His evening had been smooth until now. Reservations were flowing, the VIP guests had been seated without a hitch, and the atmosphere hummed with a polished rhythm he worked hard to maintain. The last thing he wanted was a disruption, especially one involving a guest who, at first glance, looked more like a drifter than a diner. Reluctantly, he straightened his tie, his shoes clicking against the floor as he made his way toward the corner table. All around the restaurant, eyes tracked his movement. The audience was waiting. Keanu remained seated, calm and unshaken, his hands resting lightly on the table. His gaze followed the manager's approach, though not with hostility, more with patience, as though he had expected this moment all along. The busboy, balancing a tray nearby, slowed his pace, curiosity sparking in his eyes. Something about the man's stillness, his quiet strength, unsettled him. The manager stopped at the table, his forced smile practiced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Good evening, sir. I've been told you don't have a reservation with us tonight." His tone was polite, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered with irritation, with the same assumption Damien had made, that this guest simply didn't belong. Keanu nodded slowly, his voice even, low, respectful. "That's correct. I don't have a reservation. I just wanted to sit for a while. A glass of water is more than enough." The simplicity of the request clashed with the grandeur of Aurelia's culture. Mr. Harlow shifted uncomfortably, sensing the room's eyes pressing on him. "You see, sir, we operate under certain policies. Our seating is limited, and we prioritize our regular clientele. I'm sure you understand." His words were carefully chosen, but the meaning was the same as Damien's, only coated with professional polish. "You don't belong here." Damien, standing just behind, smirked in satisfaction, arms folded. For him, this was validation. Yet, even as the tension thickened, Keanu didn't falter. He tilted his head slightly, as though weighing the manager's words, then spoke with calm precision. "Policies are important. But so is respect." The line cut through the air like a blade, quiet, yet undeniable. Conversations at nearby tables halted completely, forks and knives resting against plates as guests turned to watch. The weight of the words struck harder than if he had raised his voice. Respect, a concept that should have been obvious in a place that prided itself on service. The busboy, emboldened by the silence, finally stepped forward. His voice trembled slightly, but there was conviction in it. "Sir, I think I recognize you." All eyes shifted to him. He looked directly at Keanu, his expression torn between awe and uncertainty. "You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" A ripple of murmurs swept through the restaurant, whispers crashing from table to table. Guests craned their necks for a better view, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock. Damien scoffed audibly, shaking his head. "Yeah, right. Keanu Reeves. Here. Dressed like that. His laughter rang false, desperate even, but it was too late. The spark had been lit. The couple at the bar leaned in, nodding, whispering, "It does look like him." The hair, the face, the voice. Recognition spread like wildfire, and with it, the mood of the room began to shift. The manager froze, his palms beginning to sweat. He had seen photos, interviews, even films, and now that he looked closer, he realized the resemblance was undeniable. The quiet strength in the eyes, the unmistakable cadence of the voice. It was him. The thought struck him like thunder. This wasn't a troublesome nobody. This was Keanu Reeves. And suddenly, the weight of the waiter's cruelty, the disdain that had been tolerated, fell squarely on Harlow's shoulders. His heart raced. If it truly was Keanu, what would this mean for Aurelia's reputation? What damage had already been done? Meanwhile, Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, his calm unbroken even as the room buzzed with speculation. He hadn't confirmed or denied his identity. He didn't need to. The truth was already unraveling on its own. And as Damien's smug confidence began to crumble, the balance of power shifted, subtly, inevitably, toward the man in the corner who had asked for nothing more than a glass of water. The restaurant had shifted into a strange kind of silence, the kind that hums beneath the surface when an audience knows a turning point is at hand. Conversations had dwindled to whispers, glasses rested untouched on tables, and every gaze was drawn toward the corner where Keanu sat. The young busboy's words still echoed, his recognition of the man who, until minutes ago, had been treated as an outsider. Damien tried to mask his growing unease with a scoff, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. He crossed his arms tightly, as though bracing himself against a storm he didn't yet understand. Mr. Harlow, the manager, stood frozen, the weight of realization pressing down harder with every second. He knew if this guest truly was Keanu Reeves, then everything, the disrespect, the humiliation, the arrogance, would come crashing back on the restaurant's name. Keanu remained seated, unhurried, unshaken. He reached for his glass of water, lifting it with the same deliberate calm he had carried since walking through Aurelia's doors. The crystal caught the chandelier's light, scattering it across the table like shards of quiet fire. He took a slow sip, set the glass down gently, and then, finally, broke the silence. His voice was soft, but the authority beneath it resonated across the room. "I came here tonight," he said, "not to be entertained, not to be celebrated, just to sit, to think, and to feel human in a place I've always loved." His words carried no anger, no theatrics, only truth, and in their simplicity, they struck deeper than any raised voice could have. Damien shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering, but he still clung to his arrogance. "Look, even if you are who you say they think you are, this is Aurelia. We have standards. We can't just—" Keanu raised a hand, not in command, but in quiet interruption. The gesture silenced Damien mid-sentence. From inside his blazer, Keanu withdrew a slim leather case. He set it on the table, opened it, and slid out a folded document along with a set of engraved keys. He placed them deliberately in front of the manager. Gasps rippled through the air like a wave crashing against the shore. Harlow stepped forward, his trembling fingers unfolding the paper. His eyes scanned the lines, legal ownership agreements, official signatures, the unmistakable stamp of authenticity. There, in bold letters, was the name, Keanu Charles Reeves. His breath caught in his throat, his face draining of color. The engraved keys, each one bearing the Aurelia crest, glittered under the chandelier as though mocking the disbelief still hanging in the air. The silence that followed was suffocating. Damien's smug mask shattered completely. His jaw hung open, his confidence stripped bare. He staggered back a step, as though the floor itself had betrayed him. Guests whispered furiously now, some in awe, some in shame for having been complicit in the quiet judgment that had lingered earlier. The busboy's eyes widened with vindication. He had been right. Harlow finally lifted his head, his voice quivering. "Mr. Reeves, forgive me. We had no idea." His words tumbled over themselves in desperation. Keanu, however, did not seize the moment for anger. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bask in the revelation. Instead, he spoke with the same humility that had carried him through every insult that night. Titles don't matter, he said softly. Ownership, fame. None of it excuses cruelty. Every guest who walks through these doors deserves respect. No one should feel less simply because they don't fit an image. The truth in his words struck harder than any rebuke, leaving the room heavy with regret. Keanu stood then, slowly, his figure illuminated by the chandelier above. His presence filled the room, not with force, but with quiet authority. He gathered the keys and the papers, slipping them back into the leather case, and looked directly at Damien. The waiter's arrogance had melted into panic, his lips trembling as he tried to form an apology. But Keanu's eyes, steady and unflinching, silenced him before he could speak. "Remember this," Keanu said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "You never know who sits at your table. A stranger, a friend, or the very soul of the place itself. Treat them all with dignity." The words landed with finality, a moral carved into the marble walls of Aurelia itself. Then, with a faint nod to the young busboy, the only one who had shown him kindness, Keanu stepped back, leaving the staff, the guests, and the very air in stunned silence. The reveal was complete, but the lesson had only just begun. For a long moment, the restaurant felt suspended in silence, as though the very walls were absorbing the weight of what had just transpired. The clinking of silverware, the hum of casual conversation, all of it had evaporated. In its place lingered the echo of Keanu's words, "Treat them all with dignity." Every guest and staff member sat with that truth hanging over them, heavy, undeniable. Damien, once so smug and untouchable, now stood pale and rigid, his throat dry, his eyes darting desperately for an escape that didn't exist. The young busboy, by contrast, felt a rush of something new, vindication, pride, even awe. He had recognized humility when others saw only rags, and now the truth stood undeniable before them all. Mr. Harlow, the manager, swallowed hard, still clutching the edge of a service station as though it might keep him steady. "Mr. Reeves," he stammered again, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Please, forgive us. This should never have happened." His words tumbled forward, desperate to erase the damage already done. But Keanu simply regarded him with that calm, steady gaze, the kind that didn't need volume to command the room. "The harm isn't in the mistake," Keanu replied softly. "It's in choosing to repeat it." His words weren't just for Harlow, they were for Damien, for the staff who had laughed along, for every guest who had watched silently while judgment unfolded before their eyes. It was a reminder that respect was a choice, one made in every glance, every word, every act. Damien's legs finally gave way, and he stumbled forward, his arrogance dissolved into humiliation. "Please. I didn't mean, I thought." He couldn't finish. The excuses, flimsy and hollow, caught in his throat. His cheeks burned with shame, his eyes stung with a bitter realization that he had mocked not just a customer, but the very man who owned the place he worked in. And worse, he had exposed his character to everyone watching. The room saw him for what he was, not a professional, not a guardian of Aurelia's reputation, but a man blinded by his own prejudice. Keanu's expression didn't harden, didn't gloat. He simply shook his head once, a silent gesture that seemed to weigh heavier than any outburst could have. Damien's lips quivered as if to beg again, but no words came. He knew the damage was irreparable. Then Keanu turned, his gaze landing on the busboy. The young man straightened instinctively, his hand still holding a tray, his chest tightening under the unexpected attention. Keanu's voice softened. "What's your name?" he asked. The busboy swallowed nervously. "Daniel," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. A small smile curved at the edges of Keanu's lips. "Daniel, you showed kindness tonight when others chose the easier path. That matters. More than you know." Daniel's face flushed with disbelief, his heart hammering. In a single sentence, Keanu had not only acknowledged him but elevated him, given him something far greater than recognition, dignity. Keanu turned slightly toward Harlow, his meaning clear without words. Harlow nodded quickly, his guilt and shame compelling him to act. "Daniel," he said, "report to me tomorrow morning. We'll be discussing a promotion." Gasps rippled through the staff, and Daniel's eyes widened, barely able to process what had just been offered. Finally, Keanu reached for his glass of water once more, lifting it as though in a silent toast. He took one last sip, then placed it back down, leaving the glass half full. No grand gestures, no dramatic proclamations, just quiet finality. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The room parted for him like a tide, guests lowering their eyes in shame or lifting them in reverence. Even those who hadn't recognized him before now understood the weight of who he was, not just as a man of fame, but as a man of principle. Damien sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands, the image of regret embodied. Daniel stood taller, his chest filled with pride, his life already changed. And Aurelia itself, once just a restaurant, now held a new story etched into its walls, a story of humility, dignity, and the danger of judging by appearances. When the glass doors closed behind Keanu Reeves, the sound echoed like a final note in a symphony. Outside, the night air was cool, the city alive with its usual rhythm. Keanu walked into it without fanfare, disappearing into the quiet anonymity he preferred. He left no demand for retribution, no thirst for revenge. He left only a lesson, one that every soul in Aurelia that night would carry long after the tables had been cleared and the lights dimmed. Greatness is not measured by wealth, clothing, or title. It is measured by how we treat others, especially when we believe no one is watching. And for Damien, that lesson would never leave him. His instant regret had carved itself deep, a reminder that respect is never optional. It is the very essence of service, of humanity.